The day Jason left for work, his golden retriever, Buddy, had never looked so worried. His usual exuberance, that tail-wagging enthusiasm, had faltered slightly as he watched Jason grab his coat, a distant sadness in his eyes. Jason patted Buddy's head, trying to reassure him. "I'll be back soon, boy. Don't you worry." But Buddy did worry. With every passing hour, his gaze would dart to the door, and every sound in the neighborhood would make his heart race, thinking it was Jason coming home. The hours stretched into days, then weeks, then months, but Buddy's loyalty never wavered. Even in the loneliness of an empty house, Buddy stayed put, waiting, watching, hoping. Every day, he fulfilled the promise he'd made to Jason, that no matter how long it took, he would always be there, waiting for him to return. Jason had always been a man of routine. He woke up at 6 a.m., had a quick breakfast, and then walked Buddy down the block before heading to work. Buddy, a playful golden retriever, had always followed him loyally, tail wagging and paws light with excitement. They had been inseparable since the day Jason had rescued him from the shelter 5 years ago. From the very beginning, they had an unspoken understanding, a connection that transcended words. Buddy was more than a dog to Jason. He was his confidant, his constant companion, the one who had stood by him through thick and thin. But one cold winter morning, that connection was tested in a way neither of them could have anticipated. Jason had received a call from his boss that morning. The company had been struggling for months, and they were forced to make drastic cuts. Jason, despite his years of loyalty and hard work, had been let go. At first, he hadn't told Buddy. He hadn't even known how to tell himself. The weight of the news had felt like a ton of bricks on his chest, and his mind spun with the possibilities. Losing his job, his apartment, his stability. That evening, as he sat on the couch, Buddy had come to him, nudging his hand with that familiar, gentle touch. Jason ran his fingers through Buddy's soft fur and sighed. "I'm sorry, boy. I don't know what we're going to do now." But Buddy didn't need to hear the details. He didn't need to understand the complexities of Jason's world. He just needed to be there. And so, Jason spent the next few days preparing for the inevitable changes, looking for new work, trying to keep a roof over his head. But the stress of everything, losing his job, the mounting bills, the uncertainty, was wearing him thin. Finally, a decision had to be made. Jason had found a temporary solution, an offer to move in with an old college friend who had a spare room. But it meant leaving his apartment, leaving behind the life he had built. Most painful of all, it meant leaving Buddy's home behind. Jason sat down on the edge of the couch, looking at Buddy, who had been sitting next to him with an unusually solemn expression. "I don't know how long this will take, Buddy," Jason said, wiping his eyes. "But I'll be back. I promise you." Buddy didn't understand the words, but he understood the feeling. Jason's voice trembled, and Buddy could sense that something was wrong. He nudged Jason's hand again, looking up at him with his big brown eyes, eyes that, for all the joy they had shared, now reflected a sense of worry. Buddy had never liked the idea of Jason leaving, even for a short time. He had always been the type of dog who wanted to be with Jason every minute of every day. Jason hugged Buddy tightly, his heart aching. "I'll be back soon, boy. Wait for me." And then, with a heavy heart, Jason packed his things and left, leaving Buddy alone in the apartment, the only home he had known for years. Days turned into weeks, and Buddy's routine remained unchanged. He would wait by the door every morning, pacing back and forth, his eyes constantly on the lookout for Jason. Every time someone would pass by, Buddy's ears would perk up, and he would rush to the window, tail wagging in anticipation. But each time, it wasn't Jason. Slowly, the excitement began to fade, and Buddy grew more despondent. The house, once filled with laughter and the sound of Jason's voice, was now silent. Buddy would curl up on the couch, his eyes fixed on the door, his mind stuck in a loop. Will he come back today? But each day, Jason didn't return. Lunchtime came and went, and Buddy would eat the food Jason had left for him. He still wouldn't touch the treats Jason had bought, not because he didn't like them, but because they were too reminiscent of Jason's absence. Buddy's days were filled with silence, only broken by the occasional mail delivery or the sound of a car passing by outside. One afternoon, when the winter chill was biting and the skies had turned gray, Buddy heard the familiar sound of Jason's car approaching. His heart raced. He dashed to the window, pressing his nose against the cold glass, tail wagging furiously. He could hear the car engine slow, the tires crunching on the gravel of the driveway. Buddy's excitement was palpable. It was happening. Jason was home. His best friend, his person, was finally returning. But the car slowed down, then stopped right in front of the house. There was a moment of silence, a moment when Buddy's heart seemed to stop beating. And then the door opened and a figure stepped out. But it wasn't Jason. A stranger, a woman, holding a clipboard. Buddy's tail stopped wagging. His ears drooped. The woman walked up to the door and knocked. Buddy stood frozen, watching her, confusion and concern written across his face. He waited for Jason to appear, but Jason never did. The woman, noticing Buddy at the window, paused for a moment. Her eyes softened. "Hey there, boy," she said gently. "Where's your owner? Are you all alone?" Buddy whimpered softly, his nose pressed against the glass, unwilling to leave his post by the window. The woman glanced at the door and knocked again, but there was no response. After a few minutes, she left, shaking her head. The days turned into weeks, and Buddy's wait grew more desperate. There was a heaviness in the air, an almost palpable sadness that filled the space between the walls of the apartment. Every time Buddy heard a car drive by, he ran to the window, only to find that it wasn't Jason. Each time, it felt like the air grew heavier, the silence more unbearable. One morning, after months of waiting, Buddy finally lost a spark that had once kept him hopeful. He wandered to Jason's old room, curling up on the floor next to the bed. The scent of Jason was still there, lingering in the sheets, the pillows, the room, but it was fading, and Buddy couldn't bear it any longer. He let out a low, mournful whine, his body trembling as he stared at the door. What was going on? Was Jason ever coming back? As the day wore on, Buddy didn't move much. His tail stayed still, tucked against his side. His eyes, once full of life and joy, were now dull and lost. He didn't feel the need to chase his ball or take his usual walks. Instead, he just sat by the door, waiting. Weeks passed, and Buddy's hope began to flicker out, replaced by a quiet resignation. But one day, as the door to the apartment creaked open, Buddy lifted his head slowly, ears perking up. This time, it wasn't a stranger. It wasn't an empty car. It was Jason. Buddy's tail exploded into motion. He barked, ran, and jumped, his legs wobbling with excitement. His heart was pounding in his chest as he bounded toward Jason. Jason stood there, a look of disbelief on his face. "Buddy?" Jason's voice cracked. "Is that really you, boy?" Buddy jumped up, paws landing on Jason's chest as he knocked him to the ground. They were both covered in snow, but neither cared. Jason laughed as he wrapped his arms around Buddy, lifting him up. Buddy licked his face, his tail wagging wildly, and Jason held him tightly, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry, boy. I'm so sorry." For the first time in months, Buddy felt the warmth of Jason's embrace. The waiting was over. The promise had been fulfilled. Months had passed since that cold winter day when Jason had returned to the apartment. But Buddy's unwavering loyalty and love had been a constant throughout. The bond they shared had endured the test of time, proving that no distance, no matter how far, could break the trust between a dog and his owner. Jason had been gone for so long, but Buddy never gave up. He waited, and when the day finally came for Jason to return, Buddy was there, just as he had promised.